All right, everybody, welcome back to class. I apologize for not being here on Monday, but I thought I mentioned to you that it was the Jewish holidays and I was going to be with my family. So I was with my family and the time was well spent. I spent it with my mom and her husband in the Cape, and it was nice, man. They fell asleep at 8:30 on the couch, and then the rest of the night I just sat there and went on my phone. So anyway, it was nice to be able to be with my family for the holiday, and I appreciate you allowing me to do so. But I do not anticipate any more classes missed for the rest of the semester, so that's exciting. Let me get back into sharing the screen. We'll go back to the Canvas stuff so I can show you where we're at with our on the Canvas site. Assignment 1 was due on Friday. I had meetings all day Friday, all day Saturday, 9 hours, 8.5 hours, and then the holidays. So I didn't get to grading them, but I will grade them. And in terms of my style of grading, I'm not trying to be punitive. I'm not trying to punish you. Nobody's going to get lower than a B. You know what I mean? I just want to make sure that you guys have the opportunity to think for yourself about the concepts that we're going over. Some of the concepts that we're going over are different than you've ever heard before. And for me, it took me about 3 years of doctoral study before I actually clicked, before I understood what it was my professors were talking about in regards to ecological psychology and dynamic systems theory. Then all of a sudden, like 3-4 years later, after I was reading, I went up to my professor. I was like, dude, are you telling me that the brain doesn't do all of this stuff? And he was like, yes. Now go back and do all your reading again. So I can't expect that you're able to understand what I'm talking about. I can't expect that. What I can expect is as you move forward with your career and your reading and your thinking and your interactions with people and your interactions with your students or with your athletes, that you understand that there's a different way of explaining things. And hopefully you won't get caught up in description, but you'll really seek explanation. And you'll be able to explain things from a perspective that you buy into, that you believe in. And there's other perspectives out there. So it's incumbent upon you to do your due diligence, to find out that information, all right? So let's just take a look at assignment number 2 here. Assignment number 2 is due on Friday of next week, October 9th. Right now it's September 30th, so you have a week and a couple of days to do so. So let's just take a look at assignment number 2 is draw a stress strain curve for materials that have the following characteristics. Which major muscles are involved when an athlete performs a squat on the way down, on the way up? All right, which muscles are eccentrically, concentrically, and isometrically contracting? Pick an activity of daily living, like lifting a bag of groceries or getting up from a chair, and provide examples of muscles that are acting concentrically and eccentrically. Maybe take a little bit of anatomy and physiology work here and move it more to some type of functional activity. Think about an activity like pitching, swimming, swinging a heavy hammer over one's head to smash a large nail, or wielding a heavy axe to cut wood. Use the concept of eccentric and concentric muscle contraction to postulate how injuries can occur at the shoulder. And then use Pythagorean's theorem to explain how defining an equation of constraint reduces the degrees of freedom of a system of 2 points in 2 dimensions. We've gone over all of that stuff. All right. Zachary, I believe you and I had a conversation on the phone about questions 2, 3, and 4 pretty much, especially question 4, right? So I think that these answers are already out there. Take a look at the videos. Feel free to give me a call and figure out the answers. But it's one thing to have knowledge. It's one thing to be able to look at the videos and watch them. But it's another thing to be able to verbalize it with writing. And for the next couple of years, if you go to graduate school, your medium, your money, your monetary value is in the way that you can write and explain your ideas through written word. So I think that you have to keep practicing your tools, keep practicing that skill set. I think all of these questions here should be pretty straightforward for you. It's going to have to incorporate a little bit of anatomy, functional anatomy, and a couple of concepts like muscle contractions and things like that, muscle timing. All right, it's not necessarily whether or not you know the answer, it's whether or not you can write the answer. And that's sometimes different. Okay, this is gonna be due on October 9th. I hope that you can get that done. If you cannot get it done in time, I would assume that you guys could email me and tell me that the time constraint is too much, and then I could extend it. I don't really mind that. All right, but we do have to keep some semblance of a schedule to the course. So I hope that you'd be able to get that done. All right, so reach out to me if there's an issue, and maybe we can figure that out. In regards to the rest of your assignments, you'll have another one due October 23rd and another one due October 26th. All right, but sorry, one due October 23rd and the other due November 27th. All right, and those will be available shortly. All right, I'll get to grading the assignments that you've already handed in, and those will be finished by Friday. All right, let's take a look at the modules that we've been working on. Right now, all of the links are up there. I think that that has been very helpful to me. I've watched the lecture links a number of times to try to figure out where I could improve in the future, but I hope that you've had an opportunity to do that. We've gone all the way through connective tissue, the discussions on muscle and joints, and now we're going to have one more lecture on biomechanics, but really what we're going to talk today about is constraints. And I have to prove my case. I have to show you that there are constraints, and not only are there constraints, but there are very different constraints and many less complicated and more complicated constraints that we can talk about. And the more constraints that we're under, the less degrees of freedom that we have. And the less degrees of freedom that we have, the easier it's going to be to make decisions and to move our bodies. All right. What we're trying to do is we're trying to get things like obligations, like degrees of freedom and organization and control out of the brain. If the brain has to do everything all at once, that's overwhelming. And that's one of the #1 breakdowns of hierarchical motor programming theory. So if we can make it so that the brain doesn't do everything all at the same time, it just does what it needs to do when it needs to do it, that's pretty helpful in terms of our philosophical discussion of how the brain is able to do what we're purporting that it does. I would argue that the brain does not reduce degrees of freedom. It doesn't need to. I would argue that the brain is not in charge of these emergent behaviors that you have. It doesn't need to. Nor is the brain responsible for the organization and control. It doesn't need to. The constraints do that. So now I have to explain to you what constraints are and the level of possibility of constraint. And if there are so many constraints on us that most of these degrees of freedom are reduced and all of this organization and control is solved, then the brain can do whatever is left. And I don't want to tell you that, like, I personally don't believe that there's anything left. But I don't want you to necessarily believe that. That's just my personal thoughts. But at least the brain doesn't have to do everything. What's left over for the brain to do, the brain can do. But it doesn't have to do everything all the time. As soon as we finish this week, all right, on Monday of next week, what we're going to do is we're going to go through a review for the exam. All right, a review for the exam. So let's go back to the syllabus here. We're on 9:30 right now. So this is where we're at. 9:30. All right. Assignment 2 is going to be due a week from when it was originally due. So you have a week on this. Then next week on Monday, we're going to do a review for exam number 1. And then on Wednesday, we're not going to meet. You can start the exam on Wednesday and you have until Friday to finish it. It's going to be short answer. But by short answer, I mean like a drawing or a sentence or two. None of the questions need a paragraph answer. The reason why I think short answer is important is because if I give you a multiple choice exam, it's either right or it's wrong. But if I give you a short answer exam, then you and I can talk about the answer you give me. I can give you partial credit. I can give you the opportunity to answer the question again and see if you can improve your answers. But I can't do that on multiple choice. So it's going to be short answer and you have 3 days to do it. I would also suggest starting to read the Wagner assignment, because I believe assignment number 3 is a summary of this article. I believe. Okay, well, let's just take a look at what assignment number 3 is. And actually, I'm wrong. I'm making a mistake there. I would read that article because that guy's really smart. He was my professor and he was my mentor, and the article is amazing. But you guys are going to be summarizing in assignment number 3, the Hess, Richardson, Darnell et al. 2005 article. And Jose, that article talks about shoulder pain and throwing. All right, and why it would be the case, particularly that individuals who haven't practiced or individuals who are new to the sport of baseball shouldn't throw curveballs or shouldn't throw at their highest intensity right away. All right, it studies a group of individuals who have pain in their shoulder while throwing and a group of individuals that doesn't have pain. All right, and it does a little bit of EMG study on their rotator cuff to see why the pain would occur. All right, so this article here, this article by Wagner in 1994 is an amazing article. I'm not going to ask you any questions on it, but I think what it'll do is it will challenge you to think outside the box, and it will also challenge you to start reading complicated articles, because if you do go to PT school or AT school or OT school or whatever school that you're going to go to, you're not going to be reading articles that are simple to process. They're going to be difficult to go through. So this article by Wagner et al. Will start to introduce you to topics like order and control parameters, like we're going to talk about today, and might give you a little bit more of an indicator of the kind of reading that you're going to get yourselves into over the next couple of years. Okay, so does anybody have any questions about previous content or about the schedule or anything like that? Okay, so I think that what we can do is we can go into our lecture for today. Let me just open it up real quick. All right, so what we have talked about is constraints. And a constraint, am I not recording? Am I recording? 1 second. I am recording. Recording is good. All right, so we've talked about constraints. And a constraint is anything that connects one thing to another. But the definition of a system is anytime you connect one thing to another. And that one thing to another could be biological, it could be mathematical, it could be physical. So really a constraint is anything that makes a system out of two unconnected or unrelated things. And a constraint could be really anything. It could be just a line segment. It could be gravity, it could be vision, right? It could be anything. Now, I personally think if you talk to people about what the eye does, they'll say it's like a camera, this or that. I personally think what the eye does, think about what the eye uses as its medium. It uses light. It uses photons. There's no faster thing in the galaxy than light, the speed of light. So really what your eyes do, they don't act as a camera. What they do is they use photons to draw this line between one thing and another. Soon as you open your eyes, you are now connected to everything around you. Everything. As soon as you're a baby born into the world and you open your eyes, you are no longer point Q. You are always connected visually to something else, either your mother's smile or the noises in the delivery room. And because of that, you are never, never an individual. You are always a system with other things. And light and your eyes draw that line. Now, you have ears that also draw another line. You have other things that draw that line as well. And the benefit of that line being drawn is that you have constraints, and constraints can do things. Like constraints can reduce degrees of freedom. That makes it easier for you to be able to manage the behaviors and the movement possibilities of your body. For instance, I have free will. At least, well, personally, I don't think I do. But let's say I do. Let's say I do, John. I want to take my head right now and I want to spin it all the way around because that's what I want to do. I have the free will. I want to do that. Now, why, John, can I not spin my head around like an owl, even if I want to?
I wouldn't really know how to explain, but it's quite impossible.
Why? Why is it impossible?
We're not designed that way to do it.
Explain what you mean. I agree with you totally. Why are we not designed that way? What is hindering me from turning my head all the way around?
We have a certain degree of freedom with our heads where we can only pivot our head from one side to another.
And is that because of musculoskeletal issue, like a design? That's a skeletal design, is that correct?
Yes.
So we have skeletal constraints. What happens if I like ostrich eggs and I like a huge gigantic anaconda? I want to eat an ostrich egg in one gulp. I want to open my jaw up this far so I can eat an ostrich egg in one bite. Can I do that, Zach? No, I cannot. And why, Zach, can I not do that?
Because of the limited range of motion of your jaw?
Absolutely correct. But Zach, I want to so bad. And I have free will, and I want to do that so bad. Okay, I also, Zach, I'm not very flexible. So if I have a scratch on my back, if I have an itch on my back, okay, I'm not very flexible. I can barely reach my back. Now, if I want to scratch my back, Zach, I am out of luck. I'm out of luck. I have constraints. I have musculoskeletal constraints. I want to jump to the moon. I'm going to practice for 200 years straight. I'm never going to be successful because of gravity, because of the fact that my legs are only so strong. You know, I just have these constraints on me. So even though I have a will to do these things, I do not have a free will. I have the will to do what I can do under the constraints I'm under. I also have, Jose, I have a desire. I have a free will. And Jose, like you and I just talked about, I want to go on tour next year with Juice World. That's what I want to do. Can I go on tour with Juice World, Jose, next year?
No.
They had a little bit of contemplation there, and then ultimately said, no, I may not. Why, Jose? Why can't I go on tour with Juice World next year?
Because Juice WRLD's long gone. He ain't with us no more.
Right, because Juice World is dead. That's a constraint. That's a severe constraint on my touring plans for next year. And that means that, unfortunately, I will not be able to achieve that goal. So we have constraints on us, all right? We talked a long time ago about the design of ligaments and tendons when we talked about stress strain curves. Now, why do ligaments look the way they do? Right? Why do ligaments have this cross-hatched organization of their collagen fibers? Well, because they're used for a particular function. If the function is different, the structure is different. So there's a relationship, or what you could say is a constraint, between structure and function. You can't have one without the other. They're constrained to each other. So there's another example of a constraint. And that constraint there dictates how your tissues develop. And that dictates how your tissues break down over time. So that's a different form of constraint. It's not a musculoskeletal constraint. It's a higher order constraint, a constraint between function and structure. So what I want to do is I just want to take a little bit of time and show you maybe a couple of other constraints that we are under. All right. First of all, our structure is levers, where we have our arms and our legs are pendulums. So we're constrained to walk like pendulums. We're constrained by energy. Our body doesn't want to lose energy. We're constrained by friction. All right, we're constrained by the fact that moving requires caloric intake and caloric energy. So we have to conserve that caloric intake. We're constrained by the conservation of energy of systems. We're constrained by the earth. There's oxygen on the earth. That's why there's no life on Mars, because the earth is a system, an environment that we can live in. It's big enough so that it can hold water to its surface. It's small enough so that it can rotate and go around the sun in a reasonable amount of time. There's gravity, and the gravity makes it so that you can't fly if you wanted to. Right? I can't jump. I'm 5'8". I can't slam dunk a basketball. I'm just not strong enough. Gravity's pulling me to the ground. The basketball hoop is too high. So unfortunately, even though I have the free will to be a basketball player, I'm not. I'm a professor. But I want to be a basketball player. You know, what happens if you have to get to work at 7 o'clock and it's 6:45? Well, I don't have the free will to walk anymore. I don't have the free will to gallivant to work. I have to rush to work. I might not be able to take a shower that morning. Or I'm constrained to get up early in the morning at 6 o'clock. I don't like getting up at 6 o'clock. But if I got to get to work at 7, I really don't have the free will to get up at 7:05 because I like to. All right? I cannot run directly to third base, even though I want to. I cannot run directly to third base for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's the rules of baseball. I cannot. I will get out. But then, I mean, there's nothing really stopping me from running to third base. I could do that if I want to. I get out every time. And then I have the constraint of social well-being, social wellness, because all of my teammates will get annoyed. And eventually I just won't be on the team and I won't be able to have that belongingness and the emotions that Maslow's needs hierarchy was talking about. I won't be able to have emotional wellness because I don't belong to a team anymore. So you have the constraint of team rules and the rules of sport and social belongingness. Now, Zach, what happens if I put you on a treadmill? You're on a treadmill in Becker College, and I go across the world, and across the world in, I don't know, China, there's a white room, and on the wall of this white room is this dial. I have no idea what the dial does. You're on the treadmill. I'm in the white room. I take the dial and I move the dial up. And what the dial does is it increases the speed of the treadmill. I don't know what the dial does. You're standing on the dial, on the treadmill. If I increase the speed of the treadmill, Zach, what are you going to do?
Run faster
Why? Because you want to?
because the treadmill's going faster.
What happens if you don't run faster on a treadmill that's moving faster?
I'll likely fall off or step off.
What's the problem with that? So what?
I'm no longer doing what I wanted to do, I guess.
I mean, and what else? Keep going. If you fall off of a treadmill, let's say the treadmill's going 10 miles an hour. I take the dial and I move it up a little bit further. All right. What are you going to do then? You're gonna start in a walk, and I make it up, and I move the treadmill to 6.5 miles an hour. What are you going to do then?
I'm going to start like running faster. I'm not.
Absolutely correct. So now I can take the speed of the treadmill. I don't have to convince you. I don't have to know what the dial does. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to ask you to increase the speed. I mean, to increase your or change your gait. All I have to do is increase the speed of the treadmill. And like Zachary said, you're going to change your behavior. You're going to go from standing still on the treadmill to a walk, and then eventually you're going to have to switch to a run. Now, you don't have to do any of those things, but you will fall off the treadmill. And if you fall off the treadmill, you could get hurt. And if you get hurt, you can't get food. And if you can't get food, then you can't really keep your pocket of energy that's the human body going for a long period of time. So you're constrained to all of these things. It doesn't take me convincing you to move from a stand to a walk, to a jog, to a run. You're constrained to velocity on a treadmill. That's it. Okay? Now, the olecranon process, that's your elbow. You know, I think that I could solve my shoulder flexibility problem and be able to scratch my back if I could just take my arm here and hyperextend it all the way. So that maybe I break my arm, like move my arm like this way. You know, I want to do that. And I think that if I could hyperextend my arm, so not only do I flex it this way 90 degrees, but I can also extend it beyond its length to 90 degrees. Imagine what I'd be able to do with my arm then if I had that increased range of motion. Now that would, man, I don't exactly know what would happen, but maybe it might make it so that I could do more things with an arm that had an increased range of motion. So I'm going to practice that. I'm going to practice it over and over and over for 10 years, the ability to hyperextend my arm, but I cannot because I have a bony constraint in the olecranon process so that I cannot overextend my arm. So I have skeletal constraints that make it so that I cannot move in any direction I want. I can move in the direction that I can move. All right, now in golf, when I get into a sand trap, it seems like it would be much easier to pick the ball up out of the sand trap and just throw the ball towards the hole. In fact, I bet I will probably improve my golf score by at least 3 strokes every time I play a round of golf by being able to do that. And if I have the free will, I should be able to do that if I want. But I have never done that in my life, even though I have the free will to do so, because you have to hit the ball with a club. And for that matter, I have never hit the ball out of a sand trap with a driver, even though I have the free will to do so. I have always hit the ball out of the sand trap with some type of wedge, because the wedge has different functionality than a driver. It has a different purpose, a different usage as a tool. So because of that, I've never even made a decision to use a driver out of the sand trap. Actually, I have used a putter out of the sand trap if there's no lip, and I do it all the time, but that's neither here nor there, all right? So you drive down the street, and there have been times when I'm driving, I'm listening to the music, listening to some good tunes, and all of a sudden, like maybe 5 minutes later, I'm like, wow, I was just singing that song. I wasn't even paying attention to driving. Has anybody felt that? Anybody ever experienced that? John, you ever experienced that? You're driving down the street and you're just thinking about your life. You're thinking about things that are, you have to do on your docket. And then all of a sudden you're like, wow, I'm driving. How did this happen?
Maybe a little bit.
I'm not talking like you're staring off out the window and not paying attention at all.
Yeah.
You're thinking, you're riffing on what you got to do in school. You're riffing on, your relationships. You're riffing on what music you're going to do. You're writing a song in your head. And then all of a sudden you look at the road and you're like, dude, how did I go the last 5 miles? I have no idea. When you're in a good conversation with somebody and I drive an hour and 15 minutes every day to and from work. All right. And sometimes I get in a nice, good conversation with somebody. And by the time you know it, I just drove a half an hour. Like, wow, where did that half an hour go? That's kind of awesome. How do you make it down the street without thinking about every aspect of everything? Because there are constraints.
I was gonna say that, Professor. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it has happened to me a couple of times. Like, I've been driving down this, like, I'll be driving and like I'll get to the place that I'm going to, and I'm just like, I don't even realize like that I got here. Like, I don't even remember taking the highway to get here, and it's because I was just like trying to think, like, schedule my day out. Like, oh, I want to hit the gym, but I want to do homework. Like, I got this much time, and then by the time I realized, I'm already at the place that I was driving to, and I'm like, how did I even like get here?
But Jose, what happens if you're driving down the highway and you have free will and you just want to take your steering wheel and turn it 90 degrees to the left?
You're probably gonna crash.
Yeah, you're going to die.
Yeah.
So you don't have the free will to do that. What you have is constraints. You have yellow line, white line, number on the top of a green sign, and you have guardrails and you have red lights. When a red light goes on, Jose, what do?
What'd you say?
When a red light in front of you goes on and you're driving, what do?
I used to speed up and go through it. No, I'm kidding. I stop.
Okay, what happens with other red lights? Like, not just a red light in a traffic signal, but red lights. You're on a highway. What does red light mean to you?
Red light to me means stop, no matter where I see it.
I mean, if you see a red light on a car in front of you, it means that they're braking, they're slowing down. So you usually have only two options there. It's go to the next lane and turn out of the way, or slow down.
Slow down with them.
That's it, bro. Well, what happens if you have free will? Then you could do whatever you want in that situation, but we don't. We are constrained to brake when the red light in front of you goes on. That's it. The red light is a constraint. It's a rule of engagement in the road. And if you think about driving, you don't really have too many rules of engagement. The constraints are very clear. Guardrail, yellow line, lines in the road. They make it very clear. What happens if you have no lines in the road? What happens if there's no red lights on the back of people's cars? I'm sure everybody here is driven behind a car with no brake lights. Makes it very difficult. Or driving on a highway at night with fog and very low lighting and also not very clear lines on the road. That's difficult. But for the most part, we have so many constraints. There are rules. There are governmental rules, political rules. What happens if I want to vote for the fifth party in the United States? We don't have one. We got 2 or 3 parties, you could argue. I'm constrained to vote for this or vote for that. That's it. That's my choices. Jose, you're not on mute. You have something to say, my man?
Yeah, I said, unless you want to vote for Kanye West.
Dude, I would rather vote for a cup of sand than vote for to be quite honest with you, but that's neither here nor there, all right? The point is that there are rules and constraints everywhere. Imagine the myriad of degrees of freedom we would have if there were no constraints, Zach. That would be anarchy, chaos. It would not be functional. That's not what we have in our environment. There are constraints everywhere. So what I want to do is I want to show you a couple of different kinds of constraints that we have, all right? One constraint is, I think that these constraints here are very low order constraints, easy to think of. But then you have even more, I guess, difficult relationships to think of. In particular, and if you read the Wagenaar paper, he's going to talk about these things called order and control parameters. So I'm going to explain what an order parameter is, and then a control parameter. And that's just another example of constraints. And then I'll give you a number of different examples of order and control parameter. We may have to go past 10:20, but I'll tape everything, and if you got to get off the call, we can get off the call. It's fine. An order parameter is the order a particular system can be in. So Zach and I were talking about this situation, walking, jogging, and running. Now, your pendulum system of the human being could be in any one of these orders at any time. It could also be sitting. It could also be standing. But let's say you're on a treadmill. The particular orders or the way that your system could be functioning in at that particular time is either walking, jogging, or running. Those are the total possibilities for the organization of that particular system. That's what an order parameter is. The total number of possibilities that a system could be organized in is its order parameter. Now, that order parameter can be changed. It can be changed a couple of different ways, okay? Now, the control parameter is the thing that I use to adjust the order parameter. Now, the control parameter is like this dial on the wall that we were talking about, Zach, okay? I don't have to convince you to go from a walk to a jog to a run. All I have to do is change the velocity of the treadmill. In fact, if you're walking on the ground and it's 7 o'clock and you got to be at work at 7 o'clock, you're constrained by time. And that time means that you have to go a little bit faster. And the need for you to increase your velocity so that you can get to work on time is another example of velocity's interplay in this whole walking, jogging, running situation. If you got to go faster, walking just isn't the style of locomotion to do so. So the control parameter in this situation is velocity of the treadmill, and the control parameter is always going to adjust the order parameter. Another control parameter in this situation could be fatigue. Another control parameter in this situation could be steps per minute. If I have you take, 15, 20 steps per minute, you're probably going to walk. But if I increase that frequency and I ask you to take 1.2 steps per second, which is, 70 steps per minute, all of a sudden that might force you into a jog. So there are a number of control parameters, all right? A number of control parameters could scale or adjust the same order parameter. And now there are order and control parameters that are present in systems that have brains and systems that don't have brains. Okay? John, does water have a brain?
No.
John would say that water does not have a brain. So let's come up with an order parameter and a constraining control parameter to systems that don't have brains, okay? Now, I kind of think of walking, jogging, and running as strikingly similar to solid, liquid, gas. Very similar. What, John, is the control parameter that might make water change without having to think, okay, without having to be convinced from a solid to a liquid to a gas? What is the control parameter in that situation?
Heat or cold air.
Exactly right. Let's make the umbrella term of temperature.
Yeah.
if I change the temperature of that particular substance, I can change it from a solid to a liquid to a gas. And I don't have to convince the water molecules at all. I don't have to ask them, would you like to change? The water molecules don't think about it. It's not a cognitive thing. It's not a brain-driven process because, as John says, there is no brain in a bucket of water. The order parameter in that situation, the order parameter of those molecules of water are constrained to the control parameter of temperature. You could also say, because of Boyle's law, you could also say that that order parameter is probably closely constrained to pressure as well. And also volume. So if I change the pressure, the temperature, or the volume of the molecules of water in any particular confined area, I can automatically change the order parameter of solid, liquid, and gas. Is that fair to say? I don't need a brain to do that. The water has no brain. So I would argue that these order parameters and control parameters, they're not brain-driven things. They don't need to be. If I can change the order parameter of water by simply just changing temperature, then I don't think that this is an executive processing thing, a thing controlled by a brain. It doesn't need to be. What controls the order parameter is the constraint to the control parameter. Now, how did that happen? I don't know. I can't explain molecular bonding to you. I have no idea. How did the universe get set up so that order and control parameters are constrained to each other? I'm not sure. But if things that don't have brains can change because of these control parameters, well, maybe we can use control parameters to change other things in systems that seemingly have free will and seemingly are executively driven by the brain. So let's come up with a couple of other examples of these control parameters, all right? Now, has anybody ever been to Fenway Park and seen a wave happen? Now, Jose, we're gonna go with you because I'm sure that you've started a wave at Fenway before, all right, I'm sure. Jose, have you ever started a wave at Fenway Park before?
Game at Becker.
So you were the one who started a wave at Becker.
Well, I tried to start one at a basketball game, but it didn't work out. We didn't have that many fans.
So let's talk about that, okay? Now, I have single-handedly started a wave at Fenway Park that went around like 15 to 20 times. Single-handedly did it. Now, that means that I was able to control the minds of 35,000 people. That's pretty crazy. I never had to talk to the person on the third baseline because I was in the bleachers. I never communicated with anybody on first baseline or behind the plate. Never.
You didn't even know people across the stadium when they were doing the same thing you started.
They had no idea why they were doing it. They didn't really even decide to do it. They did it because it was happening. But let's say the order parameter at Fenway Park is no wave or yes wave. Okay, the crowd could be sitting quietly not doing the wave, or they could be doing the wave. That's an order parameter. And what I had to do is find the right control parameters to change that particular order parameter. Now, Jose just said that if there's not enough people in the crowd, all right, it's difficult to start a wave. That was your experience, right, Jose?
Yeah.
So, I mean, if there's two people in the crowd and I'm standing up going, let's do a wave, everybody. It reminds me of like old school when Will Ferrell's like, we're going streaking. You know what I mean? Like he turns around, there was nobody behind him. You know what I mean? So in order to start a wave, as Jose says, you have to at least have a crowd. And a crowd is more than two people. Okay, Jose, what would happen if I wanted to start a wave in the first inning in Fenway? What would happen?
You probably won't get it going yet because I mean everyone's just getting seated, everyone's just getting there. Everyone's probably still like not even in the seats because they're getting food, drinks, whatever. I feel like after the third inning, that's when everyone's already in the stadium, set up, you know. That makes sense.
If we're losing 13-1,
Then it's just there's no wave happening there.
okay, what happens if I say, I go out to the bleachers, I say, hey, everybody, we're going to do a wave.
Yeah, they're gonna look at you and be like, "Why is he doing it here?"
Hey, if what happens if we're winning? It's 5-4 against the Yankees, and I go up and I say with my voice like this, hey, everybody, we're going to do a wave.
No one's really gonna even listen to you. Everyone's into the game. Everyone's screaming. Everyone's like hyped up.
Okay? Now, what happens if I say, for instance, have 5 or 6 of my friends spread out at the various heights of the bleachers? We're
Yep.
up 5-4 against the Yankees, and now it's the 6th inning, and everybody has enough beer in their brains, in their bodies, okay? And I have my Tim Wakefield jersey on and my hat backwards, and I'm organizing the right number of people at the right time of the game with the right amount of alcohol in the people who are watching, and it's the playoffs. What happens then?
Then you're gonna get the wave started because everyone's already into it. Everyone wants to do it. Like not even wants to do it, but it's just gonna happen. So they're just gonna do it.
So what I did is I pay attention to the control parameters. I find the right excitement time of the game. I find the right time so I know that people are encumbered by alcohol, right? They're more likely to do it. I have my 3 very best friends with good, loud voices do it. I got my Wakefield jersey on. I'm manipulating control parameters. If I manipulate the control parameters the right way, all of a sudden, spontaneously, without cognitive thinking and processing, because there's no way that I could convince everybody's brain to do that. I'm not even talking to more than 100 people at the same time, but everybody up on the green monster, everybody, 35,000 people will do what I want them to do. What happens is, just like length emerges from the connection of point A and point B, or my relationship with Zachary emerges because of our ability to link up to each other with the computer, what happens is the wave at Fenway emerges. The order parameter changes from no wave to yes wave, and I'm manipulating these control parameters, not just one control parameter, but a myriad of control parameters. And before I started the wave, I was like, I'm going to get it happening. I know it. I could feel it. I could feel it. I'd been to Fenway 150,000 times. I knew what was happening. It was Red Sox Yankees. It was 5-4. It was in the 6th inning. I knew it. Sure enough, I tried 30 seconds later. Boom, wave. Yes, Zach, go.
So I guess I understand what you're saying, but the examples are so like black and white. And I'm going to ask this question just to see what your response is. So like, you know, with water, temperature is the control parameter, right? And it's just one variable where if you were to turn up my treadmill, that would be the control parameter. But we still have somewhat, I feel like, control of the order parameter because I could choose to speed walk or I could choose to slowly jog at a certain speed. So I guess like where does that come into play? Like, would you say like that is some level of free will, or do you think that since eventually I'll have to jog or eventually I'll have to run?
It's a great question, okay? Now, the way that I would answer it is according to dynamic systems, when something is going to bifurcate, let me just draw a little bit because it's easier for me to get you guys to understand. A bifurcation is anytime something's going in this direction and then it splits into two, okay? So I could be going in this direction and then all of a sudden there's a fork at the road and I have to determine whether or not I'm going to go this route or that route. So right now, Zach is walking. He's walking on the treadmill and then he gets to a particular velocity of the treadmill here and he has to think about whether or not he's going to start speed walking, all right, that would be modeled by that direction, or whether or not he has to start jogging, all right? Now, if you taught, now this might be a little bit of a complicated answer, but in this region right here, if I was to say, take that region there and blow it up, all right, most likely it's not going to be a very smooth transition between this pattern and that pattern. It might look like this, where I'm walking, and then there's a little bit of a fluctuation here, and then all of a sudden I go to this pattern here. All right, this moment here where your body is going, where your system, sorry, it always does this, where your system is going from a one movement or behavioral strategy and is about to bifurcate into one or the other strategies, there's usually a fluctuation here, all right? A fluctuation between these two patterns. You also experience it, like, say, for instance, when the weather is about to change from the summer to the fall. Today, it's like 80 degrees. Tomorrow might be 60 degrees. There's this fluctuation between the system where it's not a clear-cut bifurcation. You don't go until September 21st and then, boom, bifurcate to the fall. Before the bifurcation, there's this bounce back and forth between the potential possibilities. It's called critical fluctuation. Critical fluctuation. If you're trying to break up with a girl, all right, you have this moment where you're like, well, should I not? If you're trying to send a text, before you press enter, you're like, nah, I think I'll erase that. I think that I'll try to write something that's a little bit different here, that. There's always these moments of critical fluctuation. So what I would argue is that at that moment, the treadmill speed is just right so that speed walking or jogging would be afforded. Both of those particular movement strategies would be afforded. And one of them is going to cost your body a little bit more energy or have a little bit more impact. So right at that moment, you're in this kind of time of critical fluctuation. That's what how I would answer that according to dynamic systems theory. The other thing is as I just said, it's dynamic systems theory, Zach. So I have no idea. I have no idea. All I care about is now at least this phenomenon of wave and no wave is now something that I can take away from the brain. At least the brain doesn't have to do waves. At least the brain doesn't have to make the decision to go to a jog when I'm a little bit higher than the velocity you're talking about. Right, if I make the velocity, 3.4 miles an hour, you're right, there's gonna be a critical fluctuation there. But if I make the velocity 4.5 miles an hour, 5 miles an hour, no more critical fluctuation. No more free will. So the way that I would answer that is critical fluctuation of systems that are about to go and bifurcate. And those critical fluctuations happen in many different systems. Like say, for instance, you're trying to go from one lane to the next lane in the highway. You look over your shoulder once, you look over your shoulder twice. Sometimes you make the turn, you don't quite make the turn, and then you commit to the turn. Those are critical fluctuations, an example of that. Right? So that's how I would answer that question. But, all right, you're bringing up a good point. Sometimes there are more than one control parameter that are controlling the order parameter, which is why I had to take a look at the excitement of the game, the number of people that I was working with, the motivation that I used, if I was quiet, if I was auditorily not hearable, there were so many different control parameters that I had to be aware of. Right? So in some instances, Zach's right. There's going to be more control parameters that you have to consider. It's not just a one and done thing, more variables. Okay, now there was one older lady that I was interviewing back in college, and she found that we were doing this survey of disablement, and who feels as though they're disabled and why. There was this one lady that I had to go. I went house to house to house and interviewed them, and there was one lady when I got to her house. I sat down in her kitchen, and we were about to go on this. We were about to do the survey. It was a 60-question survey or whatever, and her place was immaculate, smelled nice. All right, sat down. She answered the questions, and halfway through, she was like, "Hey, would you like some lunch?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. I love lunch. I love lunch." She got up. She made me lunch. All right. After lunch, she sat down. We answered a couple more questions. Then afterwards, she was like, "Do you want some apple pie?" I was like, "Yeah, I love apple pie. I want apple pie." She said, "I made it myself." So I'm watching her. I'm looking at her. Her place is beautifully clean. She doesn't have any help cleaning the place. I asked her that in the questions. She's able to make lunch for me, which means she can feed herself. She's able to make apple pie. So she remembers, she has these faculties, but she still considered herself disabled. Disabled. She didn't have a walker. She seemed like she was fine. Physically, it seemed like she was fine, but she considered herself disabled. Now, when you're disabled, it's not necessarily because you have a physical ailment. All right? That's a dysfunction. When you're disabled, it's when whatever you have negatively impacts your role in society. So her role in society was to see her grandchildren. She was a grandmother, a retired grandmother. And her role in society at that stage of the game was to visit her grandkids. Her family moved away, though. They used to live in Boston, and now her family moved away. So the order parameter for this woman was either disabled or not disabled. And what made her write down on this survey that she was disabled was not that she had a physical ailment, but she could not function in her role as a grandmother. She could no longer visit her children. She had to stay at home. And because she stayed at home, her role in society was negatively impacted, and that made her feel disabled. Okay? So as we did a little bit more questioning, I had to figure out what was the control parameter that made her feel as though she was disabled, or to feel as though she could no longer visit her children. She had to stay at home. She had enough money. She had the means to travel. She could take a train. Even though the distance was a little bit farther away, she could get on a one of those MBTA ride sharing things. All right. But the reason she felt as though she was disabled or her function in society had been altered was because she lived near Park Street Station in Boston. Park Street Station is where you switch from the green line to the red line. And the red line trains are all the way in the basement. She had to go up and down a couple of flights of stairs, albeit she could have taken the elevator. But the number one complaint that she had was the lighting at the train station was so dim that she didn't feel comfortable, A, walking by herself because of safety, and B, she thought she was going to fall. She had enough money, she had the means, okay, but she felt disabled because the lighting at the train station wasn't effective. Now, you could also kind of consider lighting in a parking lot outside of a workout world, where somebody would go to a workout world and exercise or not. They just don't feel safe. Or I used to live in Dorchester, all right? And when I was there, after 8 o'clock at night, sometimes I didn't feel safe walking down the street. It was dark. Everybody around me that I lived with said, after 7:45, don't go out on the street. So this wasn't a will thing. This was a variable. As Zachary says, there's many different variables, but it could be that one variable, one control parameter is going to impact this order parameter. The order parameter being disabled or not. And as a physical therapist or an occupational therapist specifically, your job isn't to fix the way the lady walks, or your job isn't to pick her up and bring her to her grandchildren. Your job is to figure out what control parameter here is making it so that this woman is disabled. All you got to do maybe is call Park Street Station and say, can you increase the lighting? All right, so there's a different example of a control parameter potentially impacting an order parameter, and that changed order parameter is going to be a behavior. Many times the behavioral choices that you make are order parameters, and they are manipulated or controlled by some variable in the environment. And that variable could be very different for Zach or for me. If I don't have any money, I can't take the train because it's expensive. If I have plenty of money, maybe it's the lighting at the station. If my family lives in New York City, I mean, taking the Excella train from Boston to New York City takes like 8 hours. Go to Washington, D.C., it's going to take you 11 hours to get down there. All right, so maybe just time constraints. So in every situation, as Zachary said, there are many different control parameters that can change the order parameter. And it's not necessarily a strict, immediate bifurcation from one behavior to the next. Okay, there could be critical fluctuations in that. Now, we already talked about the order parameter of temperature and pressure and how it relates to solid, liquid, and gas. And remember, water doesn't have a brain. So this control and order parameter situation, that's not only for things that have brains and executive functioning and hierarchical motor programming. These things here are also relating to things that don't have brains, but there's still the constraint between order and control parameter. So I would argue that the constraint between order and control parameter, walk, jog, and run, and its control parameter velocity in the human body is also not a brain-driven thing. It doesn't need to be. That constraint happens because my body is a pendulum, because of energy, because of force going through the system, because of the treadmill, because of gravity. Now, you have traffic and no traffic. Now, this is something that's more relating to a mass of people working together, just like the wave is. You know, this control parameter here, the stay-at-home visit grandchildren or the walking and running, these are all examples of one human being affected by this. But this is an example of 35,000 human beings. This is an example of many, many people, a herd of people, if you would say, being constrained by a control parameter. All right, now you have a civic issue of traffic versus no traffic. Well, if it's Sunday, I probably won't have traffic. If it's Monday, I'll have traffic. If it's 12 o'clock in the afternoon, I probably won't have traffic. But if it's 7 o'clock in the morning, I'll have traffic. Right? If there were 6 lanes of highway on 93 North and 93 South, and you could actually accommodate the number of cars because the roadway is driven, is designed effectively, you're going to have enough room on the road to handle all of those cars. But if the road is not wide enough, you're going to have traffic. If there's an accident on the road, you're going to have traffic. Nobody in their right mind decides to sit in traffic. The traffic is an emergent property. And that emergent property, like Zach said, could be because of a number of different variables. Okay, but you'll also experience, like, when the accident on the road is cleared out, Zach, the traffic doesn't go away immediately. There's a critical fluctuation, right? It starts to kind of like bifurcate slowly. And then eventually you'll pass where the traffic is ending and you'll look on the road, you're like, there's nothing there for the traffic to be there, but it's a lingering effect of the fact that there used to be an accident on the road. Now there's a critical fluctuation between having traffic and no traffic. All right. Here's another example. All right. And if you're a physical therapist or a personal trainer, you might experience this because not many people want to sign up to go to Workout World. Why not? Well, if it's too expensive, I just can't do it. It's a constraint. I can't sign up. Or if you make your membership $200 a month, that control parameter alone is going to make it so people don't sign up for your business. If you make it so that the location is convenient, right in the center of town, or if my location is 10 miles away, or if my location is the middle of a dangerous neighborhood, all right? Or if I go in there and there's spit on the ground and nobody's cleaning their stuff and nobody's wearing masks and nobody's socially distant and people are making fun of me. And the trainers are all, using negative reinforcement. Those are all going to make it so that I don't want to sign up to these places. So if you're a business owner and you want to increase business, what you're going to do is find the control parameters that are going to impact the order parameters. And it's your job to find these things, to set the price point, to make it so that the lighting in the parking lot is efficient, to make it so that that you can offer masks to people who walk in, and make constraints on the ground like areas to work out and to warm up, and squares out of athletic tape, and get people not only who are learned but also motivating, who are also certified. These are all control parameters that can change the order of this particular system. So there are many different examples of order and control parameters. All right. And these examples of order and control parameters are a different level of constraint. The system is constrained by the control parameter. The order of the system is constrained by the control parameter. So not only do you have easier to think about constraints like gravity, time, death, taxes, fame, but you also have other control parameters like musculoskeletal control parameters. You have control parameters that link things like structure and function. You also have higher order control parameters like order and control parameters. You have higher order constraints like the relationship between order and control parameters. The control parameter is a constraint on the system. If I change the constraints, a different order is going to emerge. And a lot of these control parameters are manipulating order parameters of things that either don't have a brain, or in the case of traffic and the wave at Fenway, there's a collective brain that can be hundreds or thousands of brains working all at the same time. But yet that control parameter can change the entire system without anybody asking, or without anybody conducting the wave, or without anybody really talking to thousands of people to get that order parameter to change. Okay, so now we have other, I think that's the most that we need to go into order and control parameters. Okay, now as a therapist, maybe you're working with somebody who has Parkinson's disease. All right, and that person who has Parkinson's disease, their order parameter could be disabled or not disabled. If I have somebody who has a Parkinsonian gait, usually that gait is going to be with a shuffled step and a reduced stride frequency, and increased stride frequency, a reduced step length. Their arms are going to tick together, not opposite when they walk. Could be the case, and the work that we did was that it seems as though there's a change in their visual perception. If you're walking through a pitch black room that you've never been in before, or you can't trust your vision, most likely when you walk, you're going to slow down a little bit. You're going to keep your hands together so that you have better balance. So it could be the case that some type of visual change is making it so that a Parkinson's subject can walk or not. If they cannot walk functionally, then they're not able to get to work. They're not able to go see their grandkids. They're not able to function in society like they normally should. So they may consider themselves disabled or not disabled. So the control parameter doesn't necessarily have to be replacing dopamine with medication, although that's a common thing that people who have Parkinson's do, all right? But another thing that you could do is find the control parameter that might make it so that they can walk more functionally. Perhaps it's something like improved lighting of their environment. If somebody doesn't trust their visual perception because it's been altered because of Parkinson's disease, declutter their house. Get rid of a hoarding situation. Increase lighting. Give them some other opportunity like headphones to entrain their step frequency. Give yellow tinted glasses to make it so that they can see a brighter situation, or those enchroma glasses so that they can improve the visual color contrast between things in their environment. As a therapist, what your job is not necessarily to do strength and flexibility. Your job is to find the right control parameter so you can get someone disabled to feel as though they're not disabled, or so that you can get somebody who cannot function on the soccer field because they have a locomotion problem to be able to function on the soccer field. And that might be strength, it might be flexibility, but it might be something else. Your job as a physical therapist, a personal trainer, an athletic trainer, or an occupational therapist is to find the right control parameter to get the system that is not functioning to be able to function. And as Zach said, there might be many different strategies and variables to achieve that goal. All right, that's really what your job as you move forward as a coach, as a professor, as a teacher, as an educator, as a therapist. Your job is not to necessarily find the strength and conditioning and flexibility exercises that will help. It's to find the right control parameters that will help. And there may be many, many different options. Okay? So I think that's where I want to stop with the lecture today. Does anybody have any questions about what we went over? Any comments or anything? Zach, yes, sir?
Yeah, I think just one last quick question. Would this be used at like I guess an anatomy and physiology level where like you could say, you know, the order parameter of shoulder flexion, and then you could break down the control parameter to find maybe what's, you know, if someone has a shoulder injury or something?
Yeah, I mean, like, so a lot of times with like shoulder overhead range of motion, it's going to be tightness of your subscap or your teres minor. Or so what I have to do is find the right muscle that's maybe has increased stiffness and do something like an ischemic trigger release. Or it could be the, yeah, keep going.
Yeah, I just like, I guess the question is just like, would we use these parameters in that scenario, or is this just more of like a general like daily use?
No, I mean, I think that what I do is like when I teach, when I help kids in the gym, I'm trying to find the right control parameter. Always, it's pretty much how I run. What is the right control parameter at the right time to change the order of the system from able to have overhead range of motion or not able to lift your arm with pain or without pain, able to get my students to understand the concept or not able to understand the concept, you know, like, and there's always the order parameter, and the order parameter is always something I'm trying to find the answer to. And the answer to is I have to find the right control parameter at the right time to be able to change the shoulder from in pain to not in pain. Sometimes that control parameter is rest. Sometimes it's flexibility. Sometimes it's technique changes. Sometimes it's flexibility. Sometimes it's foam rolling, but sometimes it's manipulation of the muscle. Sometimes it's video analysis to try to see where that technique is going wrong. So I would say that I am constantly trying to find the order parameter, identify the order parameter in every situation that I'm in, and finding the right control parameter to manipulate that order parameter. Because if the order parameter is constrained to the control parameter, I don't ever have to convince the order parameter to change. All I have to do is find the right control parameter, and the order parameter will change automatically without this cognitive decision to change behavior or to change pain level or whatever it is. Right? Is that reasonable?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. John, we good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. All right. I hope you guys have a great day. I'll get those homework assignments graded. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me or call me or whatever you got to do. Start taking a look at your notes and the lectures, because Monday we start our review for the exam. And on next Wednesday, we'll have our first exam. Okay? All right. Hope you have a great day. Nice to see you guys.